Level 989.
Welcome to 989 on Health, where you don't need years of university to understand the latest news about health and related subjects. As always, we've created a list of helpful links to more info on today's topic at our website, level989.com, and those same links should be visible in your podcast playing app of choice.
This podcast is an informal discussion sharing our personal viewpoints on health and wellness. Don't rely on the information in this podcast as an alternative to medical advice from a professional healthcare provider. For the full disclaimer, please see our website.
I'm Mike Davalos, just a guy, your average Joe, and I'm joined by the opposite of average, Brandon Weintraub, a primary care physician. Good morning, Brandon.
And good morning, Mike.
Now, our topic for today is gluten. And as you know, Brandon, I work at a bakery. And as gluten is a baking ingredient, I'm thinking you can just take this week off. You know, I really know all the ins and outs, everything there is to know. You can just go, oh yeah.
Well, that sounds great. I wish you'd mentioned that before I prepared all my materials. Well, okay then. I'll just settle back and get comfortable. Oh, I've been waiting for someone to discuss this with. In 1728, when Beccari of Bologna first isolated gluten from flour, did you enjoy that paper? I prefer reading it in the original Latin, but I'm old school, and I prefer the precision of translating work on my own. Anyway, did you prefer the conclusions in Berzelius's 1838 paper, or today's views in 1819? While today's approach was a bit dry, no pun intended, I found it surprisingly insightful, considering the era.
You know, now that you mention it, well, I could probably handle this one solo. Maybe you could just stick around for a bit, just to keep a more engaging back and forth thing going on.
Are you sure? I've got a few errands I could run out and accomplish.
No. I insist. Brandon, explain for us. What is gluten? And for now, let's just keep all of this in English, if you please.
What about just a little bit of Latin? Gluten is literally the Latin word for glue. Most people have only a vague idea of what gluten actually is. Heck, most people don't realize that gluten isn't a single thing. The way the term is used now, gluten is best defined as a collection of proteins found in certain grains.
One common misconception seems to be that gluten is only found in wheat, but in fact it's also present in barley and in rye. And when you give that a moment to soak in, you realize that a very wide variety of products are going to contain gluten. Most folks know to expect gluten in baked goods like crackers, cookies, breads, cakes, but it's also in beer. Now, Brandon, you've got some friends in the beer business, right? Why is there gluten in beer?
That's a very good question that's going to require a bit of explanation. You've already touched upon an important fact. While wheat is most often associated with gluten intolerances or allergies, other grains do contain gluten proteins. As you mentioned, barley is one of those grains that contains gluten. And barley, for those who don't know, is one of the primary ingredients used in the initial brewing stages for most beers. The original mash generally involves boiling barley to extract sugars for the conversion to alcohol. These days, many companies and breweries are claiming that beers made using traditional methods are gluten-free, since they rarely contain wheat glutens. Hordein is the primary gluten protein found in barley, while gliadin is primary in wheat. There are very few tests, if any, being performed in the commercial world for the contents or reactions to hordein, and the warnings for people with illnesses like celiac disease definitely include barley and rye gluten proteins.
Okay, so gluten in beer is pretty logical now that you're breaking it down. The great and powerful industrial machines of the modern world have discovered many of the chemical properties of gluten, and being a mixture of proteins, it offers elasticity and cohesiveness, a flexible structure, and that's useful. So these days, gluten is found in certain varieties of chewing gum, potato chips, salad dressing, soy sauce, puddings, deli meats, ground spices, even shampoo. And the list of items just gets longer every day. Hold on a minute. Deli meats? I mean breads, sure, but deli meats?
Well, it isn't as bad as it used to be. One of the big road bumps was that the USDA labeling laws and FDA labeling laws are a bit different, so it can be a little difficult to figure out whether there is a gluten-containing ingredient. I mean, wait, you're a baker? And you've never heard of pimento loaf?
Oof! That one hurt. You got me. Also, I'm not actually a baker. I'm in quality assurance, just so we're clear. Now, over the past few years, most folks will have noticed lots of signs and labels at the grocery store touting that products are gluten-free. I think I even saw some variety of bottled water that had a big gluten-free sticker on it. Now, is this just the latest food fad like fat-free and sugar-free?
Well, it's a food fad, that's for certain. I read recently that 1/3 of Americans, and that's right, 1 of every 3 people in the US, claim to be trying for a gluten-free lifestyle. While that's a large population, it isn't the only explanation as to why the gluten-free stickers are showing up on all kinds of food. Remember from your last question when I mentioned that the USDA, United States Department of Agriculture, has different regulations on labeling than the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration? Well, to fill in that gap, many companies have begun to clearly label when their product is gluten-free. Many of the products have been gluten-free for many years, if not forever, so it's kind of a win-win for both the company and the consumer.
Now, before we get into why someone might consider limiting the amount of gluten that enters their body, there's a few details we should clear up. Brandon, would you please explain the differences between food intolerance and allergic reactions? I know they're pretty complicated, but just briefly.
An allergy, by definition, occurs as a result of a reaction from the immune system. An allergic reaction can, and often does, affect multiple organ systems and can be life-threatening. Intolerance, on the other hand, is basically limited to digestive issues, and reactions can sometimes be reduced or avoided. For example, people with a lactose intolerance can reduce or avoid symptoms by taking a lactase enzyme to supplement their own body's lack of it.
Nicely said. And now, how about giving us some details on autoimmune disorders? Oh, and if possible, at the end of it, could you clarify the connection, or the lack of one, between allergies and autoimmune?
Okay. An autoimmune condition occurs when a patient's own immune system determines healthy cells are foreign or hostile to the body. There are many different types of autoimmune conditions, from arthritis to multiple sclerosis, which can affect different areas and organ systems. Let's talk about the similarities and differences between an allergy and an autoimmune condition. Both are considered hyperimmune responses. In other words, your body's own immune system reacting too strongly to a given pathogen. With allergies, the cause is often easier to determine and are external antigens, like pollen. When it comes to autoimmune conditions, the antigen is usually internal, like a patient's own body tissue, and can be much more difficult to determine and help control.
Okay, finally, I think we've set the stage and we're ready to talk about why gluten is a problem for some folks. I was worried for a few moments there that we'd all have to take some microbiology classes to be able to follow along. Now, as with most diseases and disorders, there seems to be a range of impacts, going from the more minor gluten sensitivity, and I only say minor compared to the full-blown scary versions of diseases, and the symptoms are, well, how about you explain gluten sensitivity, causes, and symptoms?
Gluten sensitivity. Recently, it seems like this term has become synonymous with people on a fad diet. And in fact, people were 10% more likely to say they were going gluten-free than on a diet, according to a 2015 poll. There are many people who do not test positive for allergies or an autoimmune condition, but still react negatively to gluten. The official wording for this condition seems to be non-celiac gluten sensitivity.
So how would I know if I'm gluten sensitive?
A diagnosis is usually made when a patient has been to their physician and tests show a negative reaction to gluten, but autoimmune disease and allergies have been ruled out. It hasn't been entirely determined yet how many people have a gluten sensitivity, but the estimate sits at between 0.5% and 13% of Americans. The symptoms of gluten sensitivity include diarrhea, stomach pain, tiredness, bloating, even depression, which, let's be honest, sounds a lot like the patients, and a lot of the humans, you might see every day. In the interest of full disclosure, I think I should mention, some experts believe gluten sensitivity isn't a real condition. They state that the adverse effects are imaginary or caused by substances other than gluten. Regardless, the bottom line is that people can react negatively to gluten, but not have an autoimmune condition like celiac disease.
All right, the main event. My research keeps pointing me to this thing you've mentioned called celiac disease as the main culprit when it comes to gluten issues. The way everyone's talking and the way all the signs and labels at the grocery store would lead me to believe, celiac is a huge problem impacting almost everyone. But according to the Celiac Disease Center at the University of Chicago, 1 in 133 people have celiac disease. But according to the National Institute of Health, it's 1 in 141 people. Just about every source I checked had a slightly different number. It seems like a lot of people who may have celiac, it's gone undiagnosed or has been misdiagnosed as some other digestive issue. Break it down for us, Brandon. What exactly is celiac disease and what causes it?
Celiac disease is an autoimmune disorder. The ingestion of gluten leads to damage in the small intestine. Specifically, the immune system attacks the villi, which are tiny finger-like projections attached to the small intestine that are responsible for absorbing nutrients from the food you eat. Celiac disease is often found alongside an iron anemia, which is lack of iron in your blood, because the damage blocks the absorption of iron as well. Celiac disease can lead to a number of other disorders, including infertility, reduced bone density, neurological disorders, some cancers, even other autoimmune diseases. Why the immune system decided to overreact to gluten isn't entirely understood just yet, but the only treatment for celiac disease to date is to follow a gluten-free lifestyle.
Alright, this next bit is going to be a bit icky. I hope no one listening is eating or squeamish. The symptoms of celiac disease include pale, loose, and greasy stool. That's poop, y'all. Also diarrhea, abdominal pain, cramping, bloating, malnutrition, mouth ulcers, and weight loss, or failure to gain weight. But it's possible to have the disease and not have symptoms. Lots of adults with celiac might only notice fatigue and anemia, but those can be caused by so many different things, they're not really very helpful in leading to a diagnosis. As I hinted earlier, part of the difficulty with having gluten issues is that celiac can be difficult to diagnose. Why is that?
There are a few different reasons celiac disease can be difficult to diagnose. The first is exactly what you've just mentioned. Symptoms of the disease can vary greatly. While some celiac sufferers experience the gastrointestinal issues we've mentioned, or iron anemia, some people don't suffer any significant discomfort or symptoms at all. Another critical difficulty in diagnosis is the lack of viable tests for the disease. There are blood tests that can be indicative of celiac disease, but the only proof-positive way to determine if celiac disease is present is to do a biopsy of the small intestine. In other words, cut off a small piece for testing.
Now, I would think that if I'm someone suffering from some or all of these symptoms and I was having trouble getting diagnosed, maybe I had some tests at the doctor's office and they were inconclusive or contradictory, I decided to do a test of my own. It'd be pretty easy for me to just try avoiding all sources of gluten for a couple of weeks, just to see if I felt better. It's not as if you need a prescription to give that a try, right? I mean, are there any reasons that would be a bad idea?
Well, there's always a danger when a person decides to self-diagnose and self-treat. There are definite benefits to eating foods with gluten. Whole grain foods can possess nutrients and fiber that can be ideal. Further, in order to obtain a diagnosis of celiac disease, a person must be actively eating gluten. So, your best bet, if you think you may be a candidate for celiac disease, go see your doctor, specifically your gastroenterologist if you can, and have the appropriate tests run before making the decision to change your diet.
So let's say I'm diagnosed and it's official. I definitely have celiac disease. What then? Just avoid gluten and I'll be fine? I can imagine a person would still experience symptoms for a while until their intestinal damage could heal. Are there any medications or supplements that I'd have to take?
Well, avoiding the glutens in wheat, barley, rye, and other suggested grains is the key to managing celiac disease. That's true. It isn't a quick process to find relief. It can take several months for the small intestine to heal and begin to process nutrients correctly again. So, in the meantime, your physician may suggest certain digestive enzymes or vitamins and minerals, maybe even an antibiotic, to help get your body back in balance.
Now, as you can imagine, after the kind of intestinal damage that celiac can cause, there can be some after effects even once you've changed your diet. But it looks like if you just make a swap, you jump from your previous diet of normal breads, cookies, and crackers to the non-gluten varieties of breads, cookies, and crackers, there can be ongoing problems. Something about the preservatives and additives?
It's easy to forget, especially in the heat of the moment, that there are other causative factors when it comes to the wide world of gastrointestinal upset. Although celiac disease and gluten sensitivity can be a significant problem, the chemicals and substances used to preserve foods, even gluten-free foods, can cause a fair amount of trouble all on their own, especially after a long-term active celiac episode. These additives and preservatives can cause gastric symptoms to worsen.
Okay, so it might not be quite as simple as I thought, but it still seems pretty straightforward. It's mostly changes to your diet. But are there any long-term concerns someone with celiac disease should have? I'm under the impression that celiac is one of those things that once you have it, you're going to have it for the rest of your life, even if you completely avoid gluten or you're not suffering symptoms. Is that right?
That's absolutely correct. As of 2017, there are still no long-term cures for celiac disease. Avoid eating the foods that cause symptoms to worsen, and do it for the rest of your life. Even something as seemingly insignificant as a few gluten-containing breadcrumbs can cause damage to the small intestine again in a patient that has celiac disease.
Aside from the symptoms we've mentioned before, there can be other impacts due to celiac, such as lactose intolerance, thyroid issues, and lymphoma. And I don't know very much about these, but that last one is cancer. So what's behind all of this? Is it all just due to the damage to the intestine and the persistent inflammation?
As with many illnesses, the precise nature of the statistical link between celiac disease and cancer isn't understood. The development of cancers in conjunction with celiac disease is still fairly rare, but when celiac disease is managed properly, the risks of contracting additional conditions is reduced. All the more reason to comply as closely as you can with your physician's dietary advice.
So if someone listening thinks they might have sensitivity or even more severe problems with gluten, what actions do you think they should take?
Well, I think we've mentioned most of these already. First, you may want to answer the questions over at beyondceliac.org. We'll link to it in today's notes. They have an interesting symptom checker that will give you a better idea of how concerned you ought to be that your issues are caused by celiac disease. More importantly, go see your primary care physician and discuss the concerns you have. You may be referred to a specialist, and some blood tests might be run to help determine with a little bit more accuracy whether you have celiac disease. Most importantly, don't make any major changes to your diet before getting these tests run. If you do, diagnosis may not be 100% accurate.
Gluten is a really big part of modern food. I know you said there's no cure right now, but is there any sign of a cure on the horizon?
As far as I understand it, there isn't anything major on the horizon just yet. Nothing concrete, anyway. There is an ongoing search for funding to generate the treatment or cure via pharmaceutical means. While this is an exciting prospect, I suspect that avoiding gluten-containing foods will be the best, and only, option for some time to come.
I'm pretty sure it's not an absolute rule in your diet, but am I correct in remembering that you try to keep your own gluten intake to a minimum? What can you tell us about any personal symptoms and results?
Essentially, I have a non-celiac gluten sensitivity. I bloat, I feel tired, I feel more depressed, and I definitely experience some mild inflammation. I can eat some gluten, and cheat now and again, as long as I've been strict with my diet and exercise regimen. However, even just a couple of bites of bread can, if I haven't been careful, cause me gastrointestinal and systemic discomfort for several weeks. Minimizing my exposure to gluten, as well as products containing processed sugars and artificial ingredients, seems to help keep my digestion and inflammation under control with relative ease.
Now, historically, you're not a big fan of self-testing in the home, but I've been reading about a device called the NEMA sensor that the average Joe or Joan could use at home to test the gluten content of their food. It's a little device that could easily fit in a purse or a backpack, and the test only takes 3 minutes. It might be handy to use if you're out at a restaurant or considering eating some unknown food. Now, this isn't a Kickstarter project. This is a real gadget you can buy right now. I know it's still pretty early after the device was released, so there aren't a ton of independent results to refer to, but what do you think of this?
I had never seen the NEMA gluten test before, but now I have something new to add to my wish list. I would love to think that this wasn't necessary, that companies and restaurants wouldn't make a claim something was gluten-free unless it was, in fact, gluten-free. But with the world the way it is, and the importance for celiac disease patients to avoid gluten even in small concentrations, this little device could be a lifesaver, literally. I'll be keeping an eye on it for sure and see how it functions.
When you look back at food history, we suffered through a lot of tough lessons that took many years and a lot of suffering to learn. It turned out that using lead in our plumbing was poisoning us, or, the need for vitamin C to avoid scurvy. And it's looking more and more as if sugar is a rather poisonous substance. Are we going to look back from some distant point in the future and feel the same way about gluten? Oh, those foolish people in the past eating all that wheat. Now, don't get me wrong, wheat and other grass seeds we eat so much of have been the foundation of civilization for the past 10,000 years, but what do you think?
I don't know that we will ever look back and decide that gluten is as dangerous or toxic as lead poisoning, but I wouldn't be at all surprised if in 20 years' time, researchers discover that the increased amount of gluten, both produced by bioengineering our plants and by adding gluten to so many of our foodstuffs, turned out to have a significant effect on the health of our population. There are plenty of cultures who rely on gluten-containing grains as a staple of their diet, but as with anything, artificially or excessively high amounts of gluten is going to affect the body somehow.
Is there anything else you want to mention before we wrap it up?
The gluten-free craze that has swept the nation can at times seem sensationalist and a little ridiculous. After the 100th time of seeing a bottle of water labeled brightly as gluten-free, it can almost seem like a bit of a joke. When your good friend starts talking about how amazing their new gluten-free lifestyle has made them feel, just before they go and sneak a donut from the break room, it can make it all too easy to dismiss the entire thing as a ploy to charge more money for trendy food. As with any dietary change, I think it's important that you make sure to have all the facts before you make any hard and fast decisions. Know what gluten is, where it comes from, and in what forms, before even considering removing it from your diet. For people with autoimmune conditions like celiac disease, avoiding gluten can make a huge difference in their quality of life. For those without a sensitivity, with limited food choices, avoiding gluten could mean losing essential nutrients and calories they can't afford to miss out on. Make sure to speak to your healthcare provider if you think a gluten-free lifestyle might be something you're interested in. When undertaken with caution, a break from gluten might make a huge difference in how you feel on a daily basis.
That's all the time we have for today. These are short episodes that provide a brief overview of very complex topics. Everything we say is for entertainment and educational purposes only. Licensed healthcare professionals should advise you and be aware about changes you make to any aspect of your healthcare. Every person's needs are different. The links to references we've made about news articles, medical studies, or other materials can be found at level989.com/health, along with our contact information and the complete Don't Take Medical Advice from Podcasts disclaimer. Thanks for listening, and now go health yourself.